afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's Mashreq Sustainability Dialogues podcast, where we take a deeper dive in this massive push towards sustainability that we're seeing across the region. Of course, with COP28 coming up, a big moment in time, trying to uncover some insights and intelligence that will help our stakeholders on their journey towards sustainability and the road ahead. Today's topic that we're covering is pretty critical, which is how can real estate sector significantly reduce its carbon footprint and energy consumption to align with climate change targets? Of course, we're joined here today with our host, Zain Qureshi, Managing Director, Head of Real Estate Finance and Advisory at Mashreq, and our two special guest speakers, Faisal Durrani, Partner, Head of Middle East Research at Knight Frank, and Marwa Nahlawi, Head of Urban Planning at Diamond Developers. Thank you all for joining the show. I first want to kick off with our host, Zain. Of course, this is a big topic, just to get your overall opening comments on the critical question that we're tackling today.
Thank you very much. If we look at ESG standards, they're becoming increasingly weighed into real estate development and investment. And the reason for that is it is estimated that 40% of all global carbon emissions are coming in from construction and operational buildings. So sustainable practices in development and operations help reduce carbon emissions, energy consumption, water generation, contributing to a cleaner and healthier planet. Climate change poses risks to real estate assets too, such as flooding, extreme weather events, and rising energy costs. Sustainable practices can help mitigate these risks by making properties more resilient. I feel that there's an urgent need for businesses to adopt long-term sustainable strategies, and more so in the water-stressed extreme climate of the GCC.
Thank you, Zain. Marwa, I just wanted to bring you in following up to that and get your opening comments on the overall topic. Of course, you're instrumental in the Sustainable City in Dubai, which is a major initiative that's working towards reducing those emissions.
Yes. So basically, I think we are all now working towards the 1.5 degree goal set by the Paris Agreement. And obviously, given the significant contribution to carbon emissions that the real estate sector is responsible for, I think, again, we are more responsible than ever now to ensure that everything that we are building, everything that we're designing is in line with those objectives. So the Sustainable City in Dubai is for us was a working proof of concept, but each time we set the benchmark a little bit higher, and I think we need to be, it's very important that we are very critical of ourselves before others on what we are actually doing to hit those targets. As you know, there's a lot of greenwashing that's happening nowadays. So it's very important that when we have these conversations, we are having very open, honest, and critical conversations to move forward.
A part of those, just as a follow-up question, a part of those ambitions to hit those targets, of course, is the idea of scaling up these projects, scaling up these new technologies that help build these sustainable cities. You mentioned proof of concept, building out, and of course, taking lessons learned and expanding upon that. What do you think can be done in order to help accelerate that scaling up aspect of project phases?
I think mainly it's raising awareness. I'm sure everyone agrees that, especially when we first started hearing the word sustainability in the region, 10 years ago, the concept was still very novel. As humans, we are always afraid of what we do not know. So I think raising awareness and spreading knowledge is the most important thing, and debunking myths around sustainability. Like whoever says sustainability has to come at a premium, we've proven otherwise. So I think the best way to accelerate is to raise the right kind of awareness and to show that this can be done, this can be achieved. 2050 targets can be achieved today. 2050 is the limit that has been set for us, but it doesn't mean that we can't start building net zero carbon cities today.
Faisal, I just want to first bring you in as well to follow up with that, get your opening comments on that aspect, and as well as the awareness point. The idea of sustainability is constantly evolving, different metrics, how to measure it, what we apply to it. I just want to see what your thoughts are on that aspect.
Sure. I mean, I'm very conscious of the other guests on this call, so I'll be very careful when I say that I still feel that ESG is a relatively nascent concept across the Middle East. I mean, obviously, we have pioneering developers like Sustainable City bringing forward sustainable projects, but I think from my experience, unless, at least at this initial stage, unless you can bring it down to a monetary benefit, developers are still quite reluctant to think about the concept of sustainability. I mean, it is obviously a very hot topic in the West, but we must remember that we are still an emerging market across the entire Middle East. We're in city development mode, we're in country building mode, and profitability, unfortunately, does appear to be, trumping sustainability for now. All that being said, the Middle East architecture has pioneered sustainable initiatives for decades, if not centuries. Things like the Mashreq trellis, which is used in Egypt, the Dubai World Trade Center building, or the O2 Tower in Business Bay have a skin around them to reduce the amount of heat and loss of cooling from buildings. So it isn't a new concept. We've also got wind towers, which are synonymous with the Gulf, ancient air conditioning. So things like sustainability and reducing energy use have been around for a while. I think it's just the concept of what is sustainable, what is ESG. I think a lot of people latch on to the fact that it might have something to do with the environment, but the S element and the G element in ESG are equally important. The focus must be on the occupiers of the space, and how do you then govern the rules surrounding protecting those who are using a space or improving their lives.
And so just following up to that, what do you think can be done in order to tilt that balance in terms of profitability and sustainability? And then, of course, you have to start somewhere, right? In terms of transparency and measuring. ESG, it's a foundation. It's evolving. Who knows? It might be called something else down the road, but you got to start somewhere in that sense. What do you think can be done as well in order to bring more transparency that will then show these opportunities to investors, the potential benefits of sustainability?
I mean, look, we've done some analysis around the volume of green-rated buildings around the Gulf, and what we know is the UAE has about 870 green-rated buildings, which means the UAE ranks 14th globally in terms of the concentration of green buildings. So that sounds pretty incredible. So you're probably wondering, why are we even talking about sustainability in the UAE? But fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of those buildings are rated using local green building standards. And whilst there is nothing wrong with that, if we're trying to attract international institutional investors who are hungry for green assets, they want ratings that they can understand, be it LEED or BREEAM or Wired Score or WELL. And unfortunately, we don't have very many of those types of assets. And flipping your question around, I think therein lies the opportunity. The fact that we do not have very many internationally badged green-rated assets presents an opportunity to build those assets, because you will attract international businesses who are hunting for that space and will pay premiums to be in green-rated buildings and will secure long lease tenures, therefore driving in that international investment, which has thus far evaded the Middle East on scale.
Sorry, can I add something to that? Actually,
I was just going to bring you in. Yeah, exactly.
I know, because
sure,
I know Faisal mentioned something, and I beg to differ slightly when it comes to, well, not beg to differ, but just to add upon to what you said. When it comes to sustainability, as you said, how we define it, I think the issue with defining sustainability was that in the past there was a large focus on environmental sustainability. Not many people are looking at the social and economic parts of it, not on a corporate level, but on a project level. And I think this is where we kind of found that sweet spot between the social, the environmental, and the economic, and allowed us to build a sustainable city in Dubai at the same cost that it would have cost us had we gone down the conventional route. And I think so when it comes to talking about how do we attract investors, well, we have shown that we were able to build a city and sell it at prices that were comparable to those that were in the market. But on the plus side, end users or investors are enjoying zero service fees, which is what we offer in our developments, and lowered utility bills. So I think the economic pillar and the social pillar of sustainability play the role of attracting people and providing people with what they want. Steve Jobs had a quote that where he said, "A lot of the time, people don't know what they want until you show it to them." And I think when you're asking people to invest in a sustainable real estate, again, if if this means that they have to pay a premium, or if this means it's coming at a higher price, then I can imagine it's not really attractive to them, especially if they don't really feel personally incentivized to save the planet per se. But when you're developing a city that's human-centric, with people in mind, and you're telling people, here's a place where you will enjoy a higher quality of life while having a positive impact on the environment, and you're not going to pay anything extra for it. On the contrary, you're actually going to save as an end user. And as an investor, you're also enjoying this. Then it suddenly becomes a win-win situation for all. And I know I sound like I'm simplifying it, but it is that way in operation as well. So I think you are right. It's very important to think about the other two pillars of sustainability. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where you may have the highest sort of standards of technology, but it's not scalable, it's not replicable, and that cost is going to have to fall on someone's shoulders, whether it's the investor, all stakeholders, or the end users. Sorry, and adding to that, when it comes to certifications, yeah, I believe the green building certifications in Dubai did not they were not very stringent. But I also think there's a lot of loopholes in all the certifying bodies, because a lot of them have become very commercial. So this is where I talk about being more critical and self-aware of what we're doing, and ensuring that, I mean, yes, it's great to be LEED certified, it's great to be Istidama certified, but we need to ensure that still we're not just ticking boxes on a paper, we're actually providing something that people want. And that's how you ultimately attract investors. Yes.
I completely agree with Marwa. My apologies. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. I know the answer, but I think it'd be great for you to talk about the success of Sustainable City. You had one project in Dubai. It's done extremely well in terms of sales, in terms of the entire ecosystem. What's the follow-up? What next? Where are the expansion plans, and what are the thought processes behind that?
Of course. So currently we have Sharjah Sustainable City under construction. Phase 1 and 2 already completed. Phase 1 inhabited as well. We've also expanded to Abu Dhabi. Construction is starting this month, in fact. Also, it's the same model. Obviously, it's not the same master plan, but it's the same sort of DNA, same thought process that goes into it. And we also have the Sustainable City in Yiti in Oman that is also currently under construction.
And you're seeing the demand come through for these projects?
Well, yes. So Abu Dhabi is completely sold out. It actually sold out within the first 48 hours, almost. Yeah, I think we've seen that. The most difficult one was Dubai, because that was the first one. But I think people have seen the success of Dubai, and so they know what to expect. And I know it's now sustainability is a trending word, so people. It helps, but even so, it's making sense for people financially. So yeah.
I mean, just to come back to one of the questions that you asked earlier, I think around how do you scale it, and I think you can either have the government dictating targets or setting targets, as most governments around the world have done. Or you can have the market also dictating it, and sometimes the stock we've got dictating it. So purely looking at this from a commercial real estate perspective rather than residential, in Dubai today, we've got around 115, 120 million square feet of office space. We've actually carried out some analysis on the age of stock around Dubai. And we've looked at somewhere like the DIFC, right? The most preeminent financial center in the Middle East. It achieves the highest office rents in the Middle East. And we know that over half of the office stock in square footage terms was completed before the year 2010. Now, in another city around the world, buildings that are 10 or 12 years old might be considered okay, but the speed at which Dubai develops, moving in light years, 10 or 12-year-old building is now considered almost ancient. And barring any heavy refurbishment, it will be classed as secondary or grade B quite quickly once it crosses that year 10 threshold. We're currently in a place where we have we're in a unique position globally, where Dubai actually has a shortage of prime grade A office space. Many other cities around the world have the opposite problem. So this presents an opportunity to bring in brand new office buildings. However, in a lot of our existing business districts, land plots are limited. And actually, if you think about the historical way in which old buildings have been handled in the Middle East, they reach a certain age and it's a demolish and rebuild model. However, in the future, and I'm sure Zain will be able to talk about this more, when green financing is your only option for development, your carbon footprint will be heavily scrutinized. So demolishing and rebuilding might not always be the most financially viable route. So you will have to think about refurbing your property. Now, refurbing itself may not be viable physically. The structure might not be able to take the retrofit required. And also it might be cost prohibitive. We've got costs and we know it's expensive to refurb, especially if you're thinking about bringing it up to a LEED certification standard. But on the other side of the equation, we know that businesses are willing to pay premiums to be in green rated buildings. We know they're willing to sign longer lease tenures. And when we look at more mature markets where ESG is slightly further advanced, like the UK, where BREEAM rated buildings are in vogue rather than LEED, we find that there is a rental premium being paid by businesses that ranges from 5 to 15% on their rent. And they are aware of that premium that they are paying because it links to the users of the space. It's linked to things like talent attraction and retention in a world where we've got a global talent shortage. And it also helps to bring in new business. If you're occupying a building that's sustainable, it heavily promotes that business's ESG credentials. The final point I'll make is we've carried out a survey of businesses around Saudi and the UAE. And the slightly scary/encouraging statistic from that is that 75% of businesses believe that their ESG targets and their net zero commitments will impact their real estate choices in the next 3 years. 75% of businesses are saying that their ESG targets will impact their choice of real estate, commercial real estate. That is significant when we've got aging stock across Dubai, for instance.
Marwa, I just wanted to also get your point of view on that topic. Of course, you have Sustainable City, brand new project. You have NEOM, human-centric as well, smart city. But then you also have cities like Riyadh, like Faisal was saying, to retrofit, to be able to meet those standards. What do you think the strategy is there in order to essentially evolve that legacy infrastructure to meet these sustainability standards in the future?
Yeah, so retrofitting and refurbishing is very tricky. We do have a sister company under the Sea Holding that's currently involved in that and providing sustainability solutions both for new projects and retrofitting existing projects. I think again, it's a numbers game where you have to look at what strategies can be implemented. Things like Riyadh, sometimes it's just a matter of greening parts of the city and providing sort of low-tech solutions that could have a high impact. When it comes to actual buildings, it's a numbers game of deciding what you can change in the MEP, in the structure of the building, that may be heavy on the pockets at the start, but that's going to yield long-term sort of efficiencies and long-term savings in the operation. I think that's something that we can't sort of run away from. And then we just have to decide, I guess it's a case-by-case analysis But where it makes sense to demolish or, completely take down part of a building, you have to have a case for that. And again, there's so many technologies and innovations now coming up with what you may do with that, let's say, waste that might come from such a process. So I think it's a case-by-case analysis that has to be done. It's very tricky, but somebody's got to do it. So.
And there's a massive education process and awareness process in order to do that, essentially. Faisal, you mentioned, of course, profitability, sustainability. You also mentioned some points there where you may be paying a premium, but the value of the investment in terms of attracting talent, in terms of the overall business aspect of things, that has essentially a money attached to it as well. How can you better communicate that aspect and those values of sustainability? What's the first step in speaking the right language across the board in order to better educate stakeholders around that concept?
I think, Marwa was alluding to this before. We need to probably get away from thinking that sustainability is linked to something green necessarily or strictly. It's linked to that human element, that S element of ESG, I think is massively being overlooked. We've done plenty of studies on this, and if you ask people in a workspace, what are the things that you look for when you go to your office? The types of responses that we've had are things like, I'd like a gym in my office building. I'm looking for the best F&B outlets. I'd like personal parcel drop-off and delivery facilities. I'd like on-site healthcare and on-site concierge. I want bike storage in my building. So all of these things link to personal well-being. And I think as long as you're able to create an environment in which people feel like they're valued, like their needs have been considered, you are then creating a sustainable space. And I think businesses, often play the numbers game, to quote Marwa, and they think about a loss of leasable area that is being dedicated to non-essential uses, which isn't another cubicle or another desk. And I think that is a mistake because giving up that space and creating that space for personal reflection or well-being facilities for the staff in that building means businesses will stay longer. The staff will stay with that business longer, and therefore, extrapolating that in the long term, that business will be more profitable and more likely to renew their lease or expand in situ because the building is looking after its people rather than the other way around.
Marwa, of course, as well, just to get your follow-up too, in terms of being able to speak the language, to break it down across multiple functions. Of course, you're in your space, you're in it every day, you understand the complexities of it, the science behind it, but being able to convey that message across different elements can be tricky sometimes.
Yes, definitely. But I agree with everything Faisal just said. And I'm literally in that space because I actually live in the sustainable city and I work here. My kids go to school right across from where I'm sitting. And I think that honestly, that's what gives me the incentive to do what I do every day. It's promoting that live, work, thrive concept of living. And it doesn't just have to apply to residential communities. It can be applied anywhere. But yeah, ultimately, what you end up providing in terms of community facilities, like you said, Faisal, you are giving up some space that could have otherwise been a house or an office space or a cubicle. But if we look today at the sustainable city in Dubai, when we sold back in 2014 or 15, was it? 2014, we started construction. When we sold back then, we were actually selling lower than our neighbors. We were selling at maybe 700 per square foot or something similar to that, or 800 per square foot. Today, we sit at 100% occupancy with a 3-year waiting list, with units selling at a 15% premium. People are willing to pay the premium now to live in a city that offers these facilities, that has these offerings, that gives you everything you want within, like, at your doorstep. So yeah, we need to, I think the term is, people need to stop thinking about maximizing profits, but more about optimizing profits. And that's how we operate. We give up something. So for example, the reason we are able to not charge any service fees in our communities is because a chunk of the revenue that is generated from our build to lease components, that's what covers the service fees. It's not like they're not existent. They're there. We're covering them. So yes, that is an amount of money that we could have otherwise profited from. But then you have now a USP that nobody else is offering, and you have something that's helping people, even if they don't understand what's happening behind the scenes, but it's now making living sustainably more desirable because it's benefiting everyone at the end of the day. So yeah, it's about optimizing our profits rather than maximizing them.
Optimizing our profits. Faisal, I just wanted to also bring you back in from a wider macro point of view. You touched on it a little bit, you bringing in examples from the UK. But what do you see in terms of the opportunities that the UAE and the region have created for the right environment in order to accelerate this space? And how does that compare to what you've seen internationally in terms of opportunities and challenges in the pathway forward?
So, I mean, I'd probably pick somewhere like Saudi as a really good example. We know that there's about $1.25 trillion worth of real estate and infrastructure projects that have been announced since 2016. To break that down, that amounts to about 660,000 residential units. For context, Dubai has 600,000 homes today. About 5.3 million square meters of retail space, 6 million square meters of office space, and I can go on. The point is that is a huge volume of real estate that is all intended to be delivered in the next decade or so. Now, I always think in life, we always want three things. We want high quality, low cost, and we want it fast. Unfortunately, you can only have two of those things ever. It's very difficult to have all three. So to try and optimize your ability to get close to achieving those three things, we need to think outside the box or make our boxes bigger. And for somewhere like Saudi to achieve that ambition of delivering such a high volume of real estate at a high quality and a low cost and quickly, we need to start thinking about things like modern methods of construction. Things like 3D printing, offsite manufacture, modular housing. Now, whilst some of these technologies might be cost prohibitive because labor costs in the Middle East are still relatively low, if you scale these technologies enough, you can become a leader. You can pass on any savings incurred through those new construction methods onto potential buyers. And I'm not saying we need to necessarily abandon traditional construction methods, but we need a blend. And I think that is something that we need to think quite carefully about because, governments like those of Dubai have already declared that they would like, I think it's 25 or 30% of all new construction from 2030 to be done using 3D printing. And that would be pioneering in the world. So I think there are ways to do it. And it clearly would be more than just ticking a box of being greener when developing something.
Wow, that's pretty ambitious. There's always something about in terms of setting visions and targets, and then of course you get to the implementation phase, which always tends to be the most challenging part of moving things forward. It seems like 30 minutes goes by pretty fast, so we'll have to wrap up. But I just wanted to also get closing comments around the room. Of course, Marwa, we have COP28 coming up. Faisal, of course, everything needs to be done fast and quickly, as quick as possible. We know COP28 is just a blip on this long journey that we have ahead, but just wanted to get your closing comments on your outlook for COP28 and what your expectations are in terms of outcomes.
Tough question. I think in terms of outcomes, it would be nice to get some clarity on the UAE's sort of green targets, how we intend to get there. As you say, having the target is amazing and great, but I think we need to see the detail behind that. What sort of framework will be put in place to support or incentivize developers in the real estate space to help achieve those targets. I think that is probably the biggest thing that I will be looking for.
And Marwa, of course, your closing comments, COP28, the acceleration, and of course, the continuation of the journey following that towards net zero.
Yes, I think I agree with Faisal. It's very important for us to start seeing action. And we all know where we're headed. I mean, the UAE they have set the objective to be net zero carbon by 2050. But I think it's one thing to say that, and it takes some time for that to cascade down to all the relevant authorities. And we sort of we face that almost every day with what we do. So I think it's important. What I would like to see in COP28 is what is to see the roadmap and just to see people start taking action. I mean, it's overwhelming. There's a lot to be done, but it's never going to happen if we don't take the first step. So we need to start seeing action. We're actually running out of time at this point. it's enough
so
talking
essentially
and more
a
doing.
blueprint for
Yes.
implementation.
Yes,
Yeah.
we need to see the action.
And Zain, of course, I just want to bring it back to you for final closing comments from your side as our host from Mashreq.
Sure. First of all, thank you, both Marwa and Faisal. Extremely insightful discussion. Learned a lot. The one thing that I'm extremely impatient and curious about are the incentives that the government is going to put within the GCC to go ahead and expand on this particular initiative. May it be, credits, may it be grants, may it be tax breaks once the tax regime comes into place. Secondly, the financing world. I mean, green bonds and green financings are becoming common now. People are excited about it. You're seeing more investors coming into that particular pool because they want to go ahead and support these initiatives. But I think that needs to become more mainstream, and that will really help the overall development, especially in the region itself. And yeah, even I'm excited about COP28. Love to see what happens and what comes out of it. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Of course, Marwa and Faisal for joining and sharing your insights today. For all those listening, please feel free to follow them on social media and, of course, their organizations where you'll continue to great insights moving forward, of course, through COP28 and beyond in the future. But thank you very much both for joining us. And of course, follow Mashreq on social media where we'll be publishing this podcast and content harvested from it. Thank you, everyone, for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.